It is an honor and pleasure to be here with Professor Marc Dollinger, who teaches at San Francisco State University, and today we're going to talk about campus anti-Semitism. Thanks for taking time to talk.
Great to be here.
So to start, people talk about the dynamics of anti-Semitism coming from the left and the dynamics coming from the right. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so my current book project is a bit of a memoir, and it starts with a funny and somewhat painful story. I started my career at a community college, which was in a conservative area of Los Angeles, and there, when I advocated for Jewish life on campus, I was called a self-hating leftist Jew. And on a right-wing campus, to be called a self-hating leftist Jew kind of gave faculty and administrators all they needed to know about me in order to marginalize me. I went through what turned out to be a 3-year fight on campus anti-Semitism, which turned out to be threatening enough for me that I actually resigned my tenure. And as a consequence of that, I went on the market and landed a job at San Francisco State University, one of the most leftist and progressive universities. So, loaded up the family, took the 400-mile drive from LA to San Francisco, and something remarkable happened. I'm in my new office at San Francisco State unpacking my books. I've gone now from a self-hating leftist Jew to a right-wing Zionist colonial conspirator, because in the progressive space, as a white middle-aged male Zionist, I was the opposite of what the progressive community there saw, and I joked that there's a place called Kettleman City. It's halfway between LA and San Francisco on the drive on I-5, and I don't, usually you stop there for gas and food, but maybe that's where your political opinions switch.
Oh, wow.
So what I find fascinating is, how is it that the same Jewish person with the same political views and religious views situated in a right-wing campus is perceived in one way, and then you switch to a left-wing campus and it flips. So really what I'm working on is kind of unpacking that 400-mile drive.
Amazing. So what are some of the rules in universities in terms of academic freedom, freedom of speech, and what are some of the boundaries there?
Right. So this is a core question these days. So there is a concept of freedom of speech, which is actually a legal congressional idea. The way we translate it on university campuses is academic freedom. And it's linked with tenure, too. Professors need academic freedom. We need to be able to speak truth to power. We have to do our research and our teaching, follow the truth. And in other jobs, if you come up with things that are uncomfortable, you could get fired or disciplined if your boss doesn't like it. So we set up our system so that, hypothetically, we can do what we want. What happened to me at my first school in LA is that some of my, 7 of my colleagues, none of whom were Jewish, wanted to turn a lesson on the Holocaust into their own version of the reality TV show, Jerry Springer Show. And I was quite concerned about the trivialization of the Holocaust. And when I met with them to collegially and in a friendly way, as the only Jewish studies trained professor at the college, to say this is not responsible, they pushed back, and they said, actually, academic freedom demands that we get to do this. And then they portrayed me as violating the rules of the university by trying to censor them. And I said, well, no, actually, there's a concept called academic responsibility, that those of us who enjoy the privilege of academic freedom need to exercise it at the highest possible standard. And here was a case where I ultimately concluded there was anti-Semitism protected by academic freedom. And when I called for academic responsibility, I was labeled a self-hating leftist Jew, and ultimately, purged from the community.
Wow. I'm sure that was a painful experience. So how do Jews fit into all this? So there's this academic freedom side, and then there's these dynamics of being labeled on the left and right and kind of marginalized in one way or another. And yet there's a concern about, I guess one question is, to what extent is this true that there's this rise of anti-Semitism on campus from both directions? And how does a Jewish student, respond to that? And how do Jewish families concerned about their kids respond to that?
All right. Those are a lot of loaded questions, and there's a lot going on. So my first thought was, well, actually, there isn't a rise of anti-Semitism on campus in that these are systemic issues.
Yes.
That's not to say there isn't. That's to say that there's something intrinsic in the way these systems are set up. That said, the last 2 to 3 years there has been a precipitous increase of anti-Semitism everywhere in this country, and that also includes college campuses, where there's a whole lot, more freedom. Jews are in an awkward. White Jews are in an awkward and precarious spot on college campuses. Cultural anthropologists use the fancy word liminality, which is what I like to describe it. And that is that Jews are part of multiple communities simultaneously, but not a part of either completely. Which is to say, speaking for myself, I'm a white middle-class senior professor with privilege, and that makes me white. And when I walk into progressive spaces, I'm walking with carrying that. So even though there's and you know this personally, a high correlation between American Jews and progressive politics, it becomes complicated when the whiteness, the power, and the privilege fit in, and then Zionism, of course, complicates that even more. Therefore, Jews should go to white Christian America and join that group. And what we're finding from anti-Semitism on the right, of course, is that Jews will not fully be welcomed. They will not replace us, that infamous chant. And with that, Jewish college students are in this place where they are looking for a community. And on the one hand, they can pretty much go anywhere because if they're white Jews, and on the other case, there's problems everywhere they go. So that I'm trying to sort of describe the tension that's implicit in that.
Okay, so then how does one respond to that? Right? How would you propose Jewish students might engage with that?
Right. So for me, I'm student-centered in my approach. And a couple times a year, I do have students who have been traumatized in different ways by this, and they come to the office, and sometimes there's tears, and so to be a good professor, I want to be listening and empathetic. And then I say, welcome to the university. Welcome to San Francisco State University, if it's particular to us. And boy, this is so different than you ever knew growing up. And you never imagined this. And it's a learning moment. So I then will have them sort of recount what happened. I'm an historian of Jews and politics, so typically what they're telling me is actually rooted in history and rooted in certain events. And I will take that as an opportunity to sort of open them up to understand how it is that the political realities of today got to be today. And a lot of times, hopefully it's validating to them, hopefully it reaffirms. Hopefully they have some moments of humility and self-reflection and a sense that they have a lot to learn. There are certain lines for me. On my campus, specifically at SF State, anti-Israelism is part of academic freedom, and one can criticize the policies of the government. Anti-Zionism, I consider also to be a part of campus debate. There are times when anti-Zionism goes into anti-Semitism. The line for me is anti-Semitism. When that happens, and if it's a student in the room or the administration, then I'm activated because I don't believe universities are places that promote hate against any group. I'm in the Department of Jewish Studies. I tend to get the anti-Semitism stuff first. I certainly want to stand in solidarity with certainly our Muslim students, our students of color who are facing their own marginalization constantly. And then, hopefully, after 20 or 30 minutes with the student, they take some deep breaths, and if they need more support, of course, I'll send them into our university system. Otherwise, I'll encourage them to come back and continue the conversation.
Great. So I wonder, one of the things I've wondered, and I wonder if you've seen this, is among other minorities in America, in particular on campus, in progressive circles, is there a sense that the Jew is almost a deceptive person because they see us as white establishment, not knowing there's lots of Jews of color, of course, as the white establishment with lots of power and lots of privilege, and yet we play a victim card. we say there's a bullying of Israel, there's anti-Semitism, which is all true. And yet they see power and privilege. So are we kind of viewed as sort of a deceptive entity? Is that something you see?
Oh, I'll be even more cynical.
Yeah.
You're being
Okay.
very kind in what you're
Okay.
saying,
All
right? As I have done work mostly in support of Jewish communal leadership on these questions around white Jews interacting with communities of color, there is a perception that white Jews are worse than white Christians because at least white Christians admit they're white.
Yeah, right.
And white Jews will walk into a space with a sense of their own oppression, and Jews suffer anti-Semitism and oppression, and tragically, as we know now, worse than ever in U.S. history. And we walk in with whiteness and its privileges conferred upon us without having to do anything about it.
Yes, right.
So I'm letting lay leaders and professional leaders who ask understand that regardless of your own self-perceptions, as valid as they may be, when you're walking into spaces with people who are dealing with institutional systemic white supremacy and racism, you got to have some humility and some listening and just walk a little slower.
Yeah, that's great. Great. Okay, great. So picking up on that, I think my last question then is, what does allyship look like today?
Oh, wow.
Given all this.
Yeah. This to me, personally and professionally is a painful question. So I write on the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and here allyship was seen as interracial, and sort of all the famous images we see of Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King, and now there is amongst some in the progressive left a sense that model of allyship is gone. Now, speaking from my place as a white middle-aged man, I would like to see the notion of using and leveraging one's power and privilege to bring those who are out of power and privilege in. My definition for white folk is someone who risks their power and privilege for the benefit of the other, meaning somebody who is on the margin. And it's got to be done with action, not with words. It's got to be done with pre-existing, ongoing relationships, so that there's trust and understanding. This is work I know that you've been doing, and it's deeply interpersonal, and it's rooted in trust. So my general comment, to folks like me is self-reflect, self-critical, and if you receive feedback, just take a moment to listen to it, to learn about it, and to understand that there's actually a better path if you do that rather than respond with what we call white fragility.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much. Well, be sure to check out Professor Dollinger's other two lectures being posted today and all of his wonderful books and articles you can find online. Thanks so much.